What would you do if your very existence was a death sentence for your children? If your love was the chain that bound them, and your sacrifice their only key to freedom? For 83-year-old Morwenna, the midwife who birthed monsters, the answer was etched in every wrinkle on her face and every tear shed in the stone corridors around her. Share your thoughts in the comments. Would you choose to live for your children or die for them? The stones of Thornhaven Dungeon wept that morning. It was a soft, constant sound, a dampness that seeped from the ancient granite blocks and pooled on the cold floor. It was not condensation. It was the very essence of grief, distilled from the air by the chorus of mournful howls and whispered laments that filled the corridor. For in these cells, the realm's most feared monsters were crying for their mother. Grandmother Morwenna Ashweave stirred on her thin palate as the heavy iron-banded door to her cell groaned open. At 83, her bones protested even the simple act of rising, a symphony of aches that was her body's daily greeting. But her hands, resting in her lap, were still. They were gnarled maps of a long life, crisscrossed with fine, silvery scars that sometimes, in the right light, seemed to glow with a soft, internal luminescence. A ledger of every miraculous, monstrous birth. Captain Helena Ravencroft stood in the doorway, her polished armor a stark intrusion in the dim cell. The torchlight flickered across her face, revealing the tightness around her mouth, the shadow of conflict in her eyes. "It is time, Grandmother," Helena said, her voice softer than she likely intended. Morwenna offered a small, weary smile. "Time is a curious thing, child. It stretches and contracts. It feels both endless and gone in a heartbeat when you have held as much of it as I have." She pushed herself up, and Helena instinctively took a step forward to help, then stopped, her duty warring with a deeper, more human impulse. Morwenna did not need the help. She stood, a willow-thin figure in a simple gray dress, and smoothed the fabric with those remarkable, scarred hands. As she shuffled out of the cell, the weeping from the other cells intensified. From the first barred enclosure, a massive, silver-furred she-wolf pressed against the cold iron. Fenrir Munskar's amber eyes were pools of liquid agony. A low, heartbroken whine rumbled in her chest, a sound that spoke of lost pups and broken packs. "Hush, my fierce one," Morwenna whispered, reaching through the bars to touch the thick fur on Fenrir's muzzle. "Be strong for the others." Further down, a sound like grinding boulders echoed. Little Grim, the 15-foot-tall giant, had crammed himself into a cell meant for a dozen men. He was weeping, his massive shoulders shaking. Each tear that rolled down his craggy face and splashed onto the stone floor landed with a crack, spiderwebbing the flagstones. "Nana, please," he sobbed, his voice the rumble of a landslide. "Don't go. We'll be good. We promise. Just don't leave us." Morwenna's heart, resilient, weathered thing, clenched. She remembered his birth, 3 days of singing lullabies in a language forgotten by men to coax him from a womb of stone and sorrow. He had called her Nana from the moment he could form the word. "Oh, my dear boy," she said, her voice thick. "You have always been good. This was never about you being good." And then there was the song. It wove through the dungeon's despair, ethereal and haunting. It had no words, only pure, piercing emotion. A melody of loss so profound it made the torch flames gutter. It came from the deepest, darkest cell where Seraphine Pale rose, the vampire born with a twisted spine that Morwenna's magic had straightened, offered her grief as a requiem. The song wrapped around Morwenna, a cloak of beautiful sorrow. Helena flinched, her hand going to the silver pendant at her throat. "Make her stop," she muttered. "You cannot stop a heart from breaking, Captain," Morwenna replied, not unkindly. "You can only witness its music." They reached the end of the corridor, the great oak door that led to the upper levels, and, ultimately, to the gallows. The execution was set for noon. The new Inquisitor General, a man of fire and absolutes named Thaddeus Blackthorn, had declared her existence an abomination. The midwife of monsters must die, a symbolic purging of the unnatural from the world. Waiting for them, there was a young man in the stark robes of the priesthood, Aldrich Whisperwind, his face pale and beardless, clutched a holy symbol as if it were a lifeline. He had been sent to administer the last rites, to cleanse a soul he had been told was irredeemably tainted. His eyes, wide with a fear that was more than just fear of the dungeon's inhabitants, found Morwenna's. He expected to see terror, rage, or perhaps the blank resignation of the damned. He saw only a deep, abiding peace. Morwenna stopped before him, her head tilted. "You are afraid, child." Aldrich swallowed hard. It is I who should be asking you that. A genuine smile, warm and maternal, touched Morwenna's lips. It was the most disarming thing Aldrich had ever seen. "Fear is for those who do not know their purpose," she said, her gaze drifting back down the corridor, taking in her weeping, howling, magnificent children. "Mine has always been them." The certainty in her voice was a solid thing, a rock in the swirling torrent of grief and fear that filled the dungeon. It left the young priest with no words, only a terrifying, burgeoning doubt. What if the abomination was not the woman, but the judgment awaiting her? The climb from the weeping darkness of the dungeon to the stark, sun-drenched upper levels of Thornhaven Castle was a journey between worlds. Morwenna blinked against the sudden assault of light, her old eyes watering. The air here was different, dry, scentless, and thin, devoid of the rich, earthy smells of fear, fur, and magic that permeated her home below. Captain Ravencroft's grip on her arm was firm, not cruel, but unequivocal. She was a prisoner. The two guards flanking them marched with a stiffness that spoke of their discomfort. Only young Aldrich trailed behind, his steps hesitant, his gaze fixed on Morwenna's stooped back, as if she were a puzzle he desperately needed to solve. They were led not to a grand hall, but to a Spartan chamber that served as Inquisitor General Thaddeus Blackthorn's personal court. The room was a weapon itself, designed to intimidate. Sunlight streamed through a large, clear window, illuminating dust motes dancing in the air like forgotten spirits. There were no tapestries, no carpets, only cold stone, a heavy oak table, and a large, silver-inlaid symbol of the Holy Order hanging on the wall, a stark, geometric sun. Blackthorn stood before the window, his back to them, a silhouette against the light. He was a tall man, rigid in his posture, encased in the black and silver of his office. When he turned, the sunlight glinted off the silver threads in his robe and the cold metal of the amulet around his neck. His face was all sharp angles and severe lines, his eyes the color of a winter sky, devoid of warmth. "Grandmother Morwenna Ashweave," he said. His voice was not loud, but it carried, crisp and precise, filling the silent room. "You stand accused before God and this order. Do you understand the charges levied against you?" Morwenna met his gaze, her own eyes dark pools of ancient knowledge. "I understand the words you use, Inquisitor. Whether I understand the meaning you assign to them is another matter." A muscle twitched in Blackthorn's jaw. He picked up a scroll from the table, though he did not need to read it. Consorting with abominations, practicing forbidden blood magic, and heresies against the natural order, aiding and abetting creatures of darkness, leading to the deaths of countless innocent souls, treason against the crown and the Creator. He let the scroll snap shut. "How do you plead?" Helena shifted her weight, her armor creaking softly. Aldrich held his breath. Morwenna did not look at the scroll. She looked at the man. "I have consorted with life, Inquisitor. I have practiced the magic of breath and heartbeat. I have aided creatures who, in their first moments, knew no more sin than the human babe. As for innocent souls," her voice softened, "I have held them in my hands as they left this world too. I know their weight. Do not speak to me of innocence." Blackthorn's composure cracked, his voice rising to a whip crack that made Aldrich flinch. He took a step forward, and for a fleeting moment, his hand went to a small, worn locket that hung beside his amulet before he snatched it away. "Your children are beasts of nightmare. They hunt in the dark. They kill without remorse. They are a blight upon this world, and you, woman, are their source. You brought them forth. You nurtured the plague. I brought forth children who were feared for what they are, not what they have done," Morwenna countered, her calm a stark contrast to his rising heat. I offered comfort where there was only terror. Is that a crime? The only comfort for their kind is purification by steel and flame. Blackthorn slammed his fist on the table, the sound echoing in the bare room. Your perversion of a sacred, human calling, the bringing of life, is the greatest of your sins. You have twisted the holy into the profane. You are a lesson that must be taught. Your execution at noon will be the first verse of a new scripture, one that will see every trace of your unnatural brood scrubbed from this land. The finality in his voice was absolute. Morwenna simply nodded, as if he had confirmed something she had long known. She had seen his kind before, men so wounded by the world's darkness that they sought to destroy all shadows, forgetting that light cannot exist without them. The formalities concluded, Blackthorn dismissed them with a sharp gesture. As Captain Ravencroft led Morwenna away, the Inquisitor's gaze fell on Aldrich. See that her soul is prepared, priest. Do not let her witchery sway you. The old serpent speaks with a silver tongue. Back in the antechamber, a final, more private meeting awaited. The executioner, Gareth Grimwood, stood waiting. He was a large man, built for his work, but he seemed to have shrunken upon himself. His hood was down, revealing a face webbed with the lines of 1,000 silent regrets. He could not bring himself to look at Morwenna. Helena gave them a moment of semblance, standing a few paces back, her expression unreadable. The rope feels heavier today, Morwenna, Gareth whispered, his voice gravelly with unshed tears. Morwenna reached out one of her scarred, luminous hands and laid it gently on his burly arm. The touch was feather-light, but he flinched as if branded. I remember a different way, Gareth, she said, her voice so low only he could hear. The weight of a tiny, still form in your hands, the terrible lightness of a breath that would not come. Gareth's eyes squeezed shut. His granddaughter, born blue and lifeless. In his despair, he had broken all laws and brought the babe to the only person rumored to deal in miracles. Morwenna had worked through the night, and by dawn, the infant's cry had filled his hovel. A forbidden magic, a debt that could never be repaid. They will hang me for what I did for her, he choked out. No, Gareth, Morwenna said, her voice filled with a profound and weary compassion. Look at me. He forced his eyes open, meeting her steady gaze. Then let your heart be light, old friend, she instructed softly. You are not my executioner today. She gave his arm a slight squeeze. You are my release. The words hung in the air between them, a sacred absolution. As Morwenna was led away to her final cell to await the priest's rites, Gareth Grimwood remained, a giant of a man trembling like a leaf, utterly transformed from an instrument of death into a witness to a grace he could not comprehend. The cell they placed her in for her final hours was colder than the one she had called home. It held no memories, no lingering warmth of life. It was a stone box meant for endings. Aldrich entered cautiously, carrying a small bowl of water and a cloth for the rites. He found Morwenna seated on the floor, her back against the wall, her eyes closed. But she was not praying. A faint, wistful smile touched her lips. The first one was the hardest, she said, her voice a low murmur, as if speaking to herself. Not because of the magic. That came unbidden, but because of the fear. Aldrich paused, the ritual words dying on his lips. The first what? My child, she said, opening her eyes. They were hazy, looking at a point far beyond the damp stones of the cell. The first monster. 60 years fell away like a discarded shroud. The memory crashed over her, vivid and storm-racked. She was 23 again, her hand smooth and unmarked, her heart pounding with a terror that had nothing to do with the lashing rain outside. She stood in the dripping silence of a forgotten crypt, the air thick with the smell of wet earth, old stone, and something else, something coppery and ancient. A nobleman, his face pale as death itself, had fetched her, begging, threatening, his eyes wild with a desperation she now knew as paternal love. His wife, a creature of breathtaking, unearthly beauty, was dying in childbirth. You are the midwife, the vampire countess had whispered, her voice like the rustle of dry leaves. Her skin was cold as marble, her strength ebbing with each contraction that racked her frail body. You must save him. The bloodline, it must not end here. Young Morwenna was paralyzed. This was heresy. This was a nightmare. But beneath the fear, the core of her, the part that was simply a midwife, saw a mother in agony and a babe in distress. I don't know how, she stammered, her hands trembling over the strange, cold swell of the woman's belly. Your hands. The Countess gasped, her eyes, like polished jet, locking onto Morwenna's. I can see it on you. The gift. Not for our kind, perhaps, but for life. Use it. And as the storm reached its zenith, Morwenna did. She pushed her terror aside and let instinct take over. When the baby refused to come, when his mother's last breath left her in a final, silent sigh, a panic seized Morwenna. He was dying trapped. A fierce, defiant love welled up in her, a refusal to let this one spark of life be extinguished. She placed her hands on the cold flesh, and without incantation or ritual, a warm, golden light emanated from her palms. It was a magic of pure will, of a midwife's oath to protect life at all costs. The baby, a boy, slid into her waiting hands. He was not breathing. His skin was pale, his tiny lips blue. Desperate, Morwenna did the only thing she could think of. She breathed into his mouth, not air, but that same golden warmth, that same life force. The infant vampire drew a sharp, rattling gasp. His eyes flew open, not the soft blue of a human baby, but the piercing, intelligent silver of his kind. And as he took his first breath, a thin, shimmering thread of gold, visible only to her, spun from her own chest and connected itself to his. A bond, a tether, a promise that he would never be alone in the world. Valdris, his father whispered, weeping tears of blood as he took the child. His name is Valdris. He looked at Morwenna with an awe that bordered on terror. You are his true mother now. The memory faded, leaving Morwenna back in the cold cell, the phantom sensation of a cold, newborn vampire in her hands. She looked at Aldrich, who was staring at her, the bowl of water forgotten, his face a canvas of shock and dawning horror. You breathed your own life into it, he whispered, aghast. I breathed life into a child who had none, she corrected gently. The bond was forged in that moment, an accident of love and desperation. It was only later I learned its true nature and its terrible price. Aldrich sank onto the stool opposite her, his priestly composure shattered. The story was not one of dark pacts and demonic rituals he had been taught to expect. It was a story of a difficult birth, a story of sacrifice, a mother's story. You love them? The question was torn from him, a fundamental pillar of his belief system cracking under the weight of her simple, devastating narrative. Morwenna looked at him, her ancient eyes clear and sure. They are my children, she stated, as if it were the most obvious truth in the world. What is a mother if not love? Outside the high, barred window of the cell, the first deep-throated howls of the gathering monster army began to rise, a dissonant, grieving choir answering the truth of her words. They were not howling in rage. They were calling for their mother. The howls that seeped through the stone were not a single sound, but a layered symphony of dread. From the deep, chest-rattling bellows of the giants to the high, keening wails of the vampires, it was a wall of sound that pressed against Thornhaven Castle, making the very glass in the windows hum. Inside, the air was thick with the smell of fierce sweat and polished steel. Beyond the walls, in the twilight of the gathering storm, the army of Morwenna's children assembled. Valdris Nightblood stood atop a weather-worn outcrop, his black cloak perfectly still in the wind, as if even the air dared not disturb him. At 247 years old, he possessed a stillness that was more imposing than any show of force. His silver eyes, mirrors to the one who had given him his first breath, scanned the castle's battlements with cold, calculating precision. He was the firstborn, and the weight of leadership fell upon him like a mantle. They will not give her to us, he stated, his voice quiet, yet carrying to the assembled lords and ladies of the night who stood behind him. The blackthorns of the world never do. A low growl answered him. Fenra Moon's car paced at the base of the rock, a ripple of powerful muscle and silver fur. Her pack, nearly 3 dozen strong, echoed her agitation, a sea of shifting shadows and glinting eyes in the treeline. Then we take her. Her voice was a rough scrape in their minds, a gift and a curse of the elder werewolves. We tear down their stone den and carry our Nana home. That is what he wants, Valdris replied, his gaze never leaving the castle. He wants the monsters to storm the gates. It justifies the purge. It makes his story true. He turned his head slightly. Ironjaw, your assessment. From the deepest shadows of the forest, a figure emerged that made the ground tremble. Ironjaw Stonefist, his skin like granite, one eye a milky white scar, looked at the main gate. He did not speak. He simply raised a fist the size of an anvil and brought it down slowly onto his open palm. The message was clear, it will fall. But then he pointed a thick finger at the highest window of the dungeon tower and shook his head, but not before they kill her. A mournful melody wove through the tense conference. Seraphine Pale Rose sat perched on a high branch, her fingers tracing invisible patterns in the air, her song a crystallized expression of their collective despair. She is afraid, Seraphine whispered, her voice the echo of her song. Not for herself. For us. Her heart is a cage of sorrow. Back inside the castle walls, the human world was unraveling. Captain Helena Ravencroft stood in the war room, facing Inquisitor Blackthorn. Maps were strewn across the table, but no one was looking at them. Listen to them. Helena insisted, her voice tight. They are not attacking. They are mourning. This is not a siege, it's a vigil. If you go through with this execution, you are not putting down a rebellion. You are throwing a torch into a powder keg. Blackthorn's face was a mask of cold fury. They circle my walls like vultures, Captain. Their very presence is an attack on the natural order. Your sympathy for these creatures is noted, and it is starting to sound dangerously like treason. His eyes narrowed, probing for a weakness he sensed, but could not name. Or is there something more? A personal connection, perhaps? Helena's blood ran cold. Her brother, the one with the fever that came with the full moon, the one Morwenna had visited in secret all those years ago, the one who had vanished into the woods 5 winters past, now running with Fenra's pack. Did Blackthorn know? She forced her expression to remain neutral, the lie of familiar armor. My only connection is to my duty, and my duty is to protect this castle and its people. This act will not protect them. It will doom them. Enough. Blackthorn slammed his hand on the table. The sentence will be carried out at noon. Let the beasts weep. Their mother will be a lesson in the Creator's justice. He stormed out, leaving Helena alone in the tense silence. She walked to the window, looking down at the courtyard where the gallows stood, a stark, skeletal structure against the gray sky. Her eyes then drifted to the forest edge, to the flicker of silver that was Fenra. Her brother was out there, and the woman who had saved him was inside, condemned to die. The chain of command felt like a noose around her own neck. Down in the courtyard, the guards assigned to the perimeter shifted nervously. Their pikes and crossbows felt like toys against the palpable grief and rage emanating from the woods. They heard the intelligence in the vampire's coordinated silence, felt the raw power in the werewolf's growls, and saw the immense shadows of the giants moving between the trees. This was not a fight they could win. The tension snapped taut when Ironjaw Stonefist took a single, thunderous step out of the treeline. He did not roar. He did not brandish a weapon. He simply stood there, a mountain of silent, implacable force, his single good eye fixed on the castle's main gate. It was not a threat of action, but a statement of consequence. It was the embodiment of a mother's love, given form and stone and muscle, and it was more terrifying than any battle cry. The message was received. Inside her cell, feeling the shift in the very air, Morwenna closed her eyes and whispered a single, fervent prayer. Be wise, my children. Be still. The air in the final cell grew heavy, saturated with the palpable dread from beyond the walls. Aldrich could no longer feel the cold stone beneath him. He was adrift on the sea of Morwenna's story, his faith a shattered vessel against the rocks of her reality. "The bond," he whispered, his voice hoarse. "The thread I saw in your memory. It was not just with Valdris, was it?" Morwenna shook her head slowly, her gaze turning inward, towards a darker, more painful memory. "No, child. It was with everyone. With every special child I helped into this world. A new thread spun from my soul. A mother's connection, made visible by magic. At first, I thought it a blessing. It let me feel their joy, soothe their fears from leagues away." Her voice grew thin, strained. But blessings and curses are two sides of the same coin. The present cell seemed to dissolve, replaced by the smoky, herb-scented confines of a different prison, decades past. This one was self-imposed. She stood before a crooked hut hidden deep in the whispering woods, the home of Grandmother Yaga, the last known keeper of the old ways. Morwenna was younger, her hair just beginning to silver, but her face was already etched with a fear she could no longer bear alone. The silvery scars on her hands pulsed with a faint light. "They are hunting them, Yaga," Morwenna said, her voice trembling as she stood before the ancient, blind witch. "The children, they call them monsters, and they are putting them down like rabid dogs. I can feel it. I feel every silver blade, every holy symbol burned into their flesh, every life snuffed out." She clutched her chest, gasping. "It is a pain in my own soul. I cannot protect them." Yaga, her eyes milky white, nodded slowly, her gnarled fingers stroking the feathers of a large, black raven sorrow, perched on her shoulder. "The threads of life you spun are a two-edged sword, daughter. You feel their pain, and a hunter who knows the old ways. They could use you to find them, to track them all." Morwenna's blood ran cold. "What have I done?" "You love them," Yaga said simply. "But love without protection is a sentence. There's a way, a final safeguard, a binding of last resort." She explained the spell, her words painting a picture of terrifying beauty and sacrifice. It was not a spell to be cast lightly, for it could not be undone. Morwenna would weave her own life force as the central anchor of a great, protective web. The threads connecting her to her children would be reinforced, hidden from sight, but their nature would change. As they grow, the bond will naturally weaken, their own life force becoming strong enough to stand alone, Yaga intoned. "But if you are slain, if your life is cut short by violence..." The witch's blind eyes seemed to see into the very core of her. "The magic will interpret it as a coordinated attack on the entire web. A mother murdered, to save the children from a fate worse than death, from being hunted, tormented, or their souls captured for dark purposes. The spell will sever every thread. Instantly." Morwenna stared, comprehension dawning like a cold dawn. "They would die. They would be free," Yaga corrected, her voice grim, their souls released, whole and untouchable, before any hunter could claim them. "It is a mother's final, ultimate act of protection. You make your life the lock, and your death the key to their freedom." The choice was an abyss. To live, knowing she was a walking death sentence for every child she loved, or to refuse, and leave them vulnerable to the cruelties of the world. There was no choice at all. "Do it," Morwenna whispered. The ritual was a silent, internal agony. She felt the golden threads tighten, transforming from gentle tethers of love into unbreakable chains of sacrifice. She felt the weight of it settle into her bones, a burden she would carry every moment for the rest of her life. The memory faded, leaving Morwenna looking ancient and immeasurably weary in the present cell. "I made myself their linchpin," she breathed, the confession a heavy weight lifted after decades of silence. Aldrich stared, his mind reeling. The theology, the doctrine, the clear lines between good and evil he had been taught, it was all ash. This was not witchcraft. This was a love so vast, so terrifying. It defied all understanding. It was a love that chose to hold the power of life and death over its beloved, solely to keep them safe from a world that hated them. "You made yourself." He struggled for the words, horror and all warring within him. their linchpin. Morwenna looked at him, and in her eyes, he saw not a witch, not a monster, but a mother bearing the unimaginable weight of the world. "I made myself their mother," she corrected him, her voice firm, resolute, echoing with the finality of the choice she had made so long ago. This was simply the price. The bell tolled, a sonorous, iron clang that cut through the symphony of grief from the forest and silenced it for one held, breathless moment. Noon. The door to Morwenna's cell swung open. This time, it was not Captain Ravencroft who entered, but two of Blackthorn's personal guards, their faces set in grim masks. There was no gentleness in their touch as they took her arms. Aldrich stood, his legs unsteady. The bowl of sanctified water he had brought for the rites sat untouched, a pointless mockery. How did one cleanse a soul that had already been sanctified by a love so profound it demanded ultimate sacrifice? The rituals of his faith felt like childish scribbles next to the epic poem of her existence. They led her up, out of the castle's bowels, and into the main courtyard. The shift was jarring. After the perpetual twilight of the dungeon, the diffuse gray light of the overcast day felt blinding. The air was cold and sharp, carrying the scent of damp stone and a nervous crowd. The gallows stood in the center of the courtyard, a stark, raw wooden structure against the somber sky. A noose of rough hemp dangled from the crossbeam, an empty promise of an end. The townsfolk of Thornhaven, those not cowering in their homes, were gathered at the edges, their faces a mixture of fear, morbid curiosity, and in some, a grim satisfaction. They saw only the witch, the monster lover, but Morwenna's eyes were not on them. They were on the periphery, on the castle walls, on the shadows between the trees. She could feel them. Valdris, a cold, focused point of fury. Fenra, a roiling storm of protective rage. Little Grim, a tremor of pure, childish terror. Seraphine's song had fallen silent, but the air still thrummed with its echo. The guards led her up the wooden steps. The planks creaked under their weight, a drumbeat counting down her final moments. Executioner Gareth Grimwood waited on the platform, his face a gray, sweating mask beneath his black hood. His hands, which had ended hundreds of lives, trembled as he took hold of the noose. Inquisitor Blackthorn stood to the side, a black pillar of righteousness. "Let this be a lesson." His voice rang out, clear and cold, that no abomination, no matter how ancient or cunning, can stand against the pure light of... Stop. The word was not loud, but it was sharp, a crack in the facade of the ceremony. All eyes turned to Aldrich. He had followed the procession up the steps, his young face pale, but his jaw set. He stepped between Morwenna and the executioner, placing himself in the center of the stage. Blackthorn's eyes narrowed to slits. "Step aside, priest. Do not interrupt the Creator's work. This is not his work." Aldrich's voice gained strength, fueled by a conviction that had been born in the dungeon's darkness. He pointed a shaking finger at Morwenna, then swept it towards the forest, towards the unseen army. "You are not executing a witch. You are murdering a saint. Her only crime is love. Their only crime is existing." A ripple of shock and murmuring went through the crowd. Blackthorn's face flushed with fury. "You have been bewitched, boy. Seize him." As two guards moved towards the platform, a new sound erupted. It was not a howl of attack, but a deep, guttural roar of challenge that could only have come from Fenramoon's car. It was answered by a chorus of snarls and the terrifying sound of splintering wood from the forest's edge. On the platform, Captain Helena Ravencroft, who had been standing guard, saw her moment. As the guards reached for Aldrich, she moved not to aid them, but to place herself squarely in their path, her sword still sheathed but her stance unequivocal. "Enough," she said, her voice cutting through the chaos. Her eyes locked with Blackthorn's. "The boy is right." The courtyard descended into a frozen tableau of tension. The fanatical inquisitor, the defiant captain, the heretical priest, the trembling executioner, and at the center of it all, the serene old woman whose love had brought a kingdom to the brink of civil war. The carefully orchestrated execution had shattered, and in its place was only the raw, unpredictable truth of the moment. For a heartbeat that stretched into an eternity, the world held its breath. The wind died. The murmured shock of the crowd stilled. Even the monstrous chorus from the forest seemed to pause, waiting. It was Inquisitor Blackthorn who broke the silence. A vein throbbed at his temple, his face a contorted mask of pure rage. "Captain Ravencroft," he hissed, the words dripping with venomous disbelief. "You would choose these abominations over your own kind, over your holy duty." Helena did not draw her sword. That would have been a declaration of war she was not yet ready to make. Instead, she stood her ground, a rock in the rising tide of his fury. "I am choosing to prevent a massacre," she stated, her voice ringing with a command that carried across the courtyard. "I am choosing to not execute an unarmed old woman for the crime of compassion. That is my duty." This public defiance was the final straw. Blackthorn's composure, a thin veneer over a bottomless well of fanaticism, shattered completely. "Seize them all," he roared, spittle flying from his lips. The witch, the traitor, the heretic. Now, his loyal guards surged forward. The sound was the crack of a whip. It was Thornback the Scarred, the battle-hardened werewolf whose body was a testament to humanity's hatred, finally breaking through the treeline. He did not wait for Valdris's command, driven by a feral need for vengeance that overrode all strategy. A blur of scarred gray fur and fury, he launched himself towards the gallows, towards the source of his Nana's pain, Thaddeus Blackthorn. Chaos, true and absolute, erupted. The crowd screamed and scattered. Guards who had been hesitant now raised their weapons, the line between order and anarchy dissolving. From the castle walls, the vampire twins, Cassius and Cressida, became a whirlwind of motion, their youthful forms moving with impossible speed to create distractions, overturning weapon racks, loosening banners to tangle guards, their synchronized laughter a chilling counterpoint to the panic. No, the voice that cut through the bedlam was not a roar, not a shriek, but a command woven with 6 decades of unwavering love and authority. It was Morwenna. She had remained still throughout the confrontation, a silent sun around which the storm revolved. But now, as her children descended into the violence she had always feared for them, she acted. Her voice, though aged, carried the power of the countless lives she had ushered into the world. It froze Thornback in mid-leap. It made the twins skid to a halt on the parapets. It cut through the red mist in Fenrir's mind. "Stand down." Morwenna's gaze swept over her children, her eyes pleading. "All of you. That is an order." In that single, suspended second of obedience, Blackthorn saw his opening. His eyes, wild with triumph and hatred, found Thornback, still poised to strike. He did not see a grieving child defending his mother. He saw only the beast that had haunted his nightmares since his daughter's death. With a guttural cry, he drew a hidden, wickedly sharp dagger from his robes, its blade gleaming with pure silver. He lunged, not at Morwenna, but at the vulnerable flank of the frozen werewolf. He never made contact. Captain Helena Ravencroft moved with the speed of a decision long contemplated. Her own sword, still sheathed, was too slow. Instead, she threw her body into the path of the blow. The Inquisitor's silver dagger meant for Thornback's heart sank deep into the armored, plating over her shoulder with the sickening crunch of metal and bone. Collective gasps swept the courtyard. Helena cried out, staggering back, the holy silver searing her flesh even through the wound. She collapsed to her knees, her eyes, wide with pain and shock, locking with Morwenna's. The message in them was clear. It was not just for her brother in the woods. It was for the woman who had shown him mercy. It was for the principle that law without compassion is tyranny. The courtyard fell silent once more, the fight gone out of everyone. All that remained was the heavy, ragged sound of Helena's breathing and the slow, steady drip of her blood on the gallows planks. The line had been drawn, not in sand, but in sacrifice. The world narrowed to the drip of blood on weathered wood. Helena's sacrifice hung in the air, a truth more powerful than any of Blackthorn's sermons. The fanatical fire in his eyes guttered, replaced by a flicker of stunned confusion. He stared at the loyal captain he had just felled, the silver dagger still protruding from her shoulder, its purity defiled by an act of human defiance. Morwenna did not look at her wound. She looked into Helena's eyes, and in that shared glance, an entire history of secret kindnesses and protected truths was acknowledged. A silent, "Thank you, my child." Then, Morwenna turned her gaze to Blackthorn. The serenity was gone, replaced by a terrible, ancient knowing. "You think this is about witchcraft, Inquisitor?" Her voice was low, but it carried to every corner of the silent courtyard. "You think this is about heresy?" She took a slow, deliberate step towards him, and he, the scourge of monsters, took an involuntary step back. "This has always been about a mother's love, and you, who lost a child to the darkness, should understand its lengths better than anyone." She gestured to the dagger in Helena's shoulder. "You used holy silver, the bane of their kind. You knew it would cause not just death, but agony. You have studied us. You have studied me." Her eyes, like dark pools, seemed to see into the very depths of his tortured soul. "You did not just pull that blade to kill a beast. You pulled it hoping to wound me. You know, don't you? Grandmother Yaga, before you had her killed. She told you." Blackthorn's face went ashen. The locket around his neck felt like a brand. His secret, his ultimate strategic advantage, was being laid bare before the crowd, before his own guards. "She told you of the binding," Morwenna continued, her voice gaining a sharp, cutting edge. "The life-for-life bond. You never intended this execution to be a lesson for the people. You intended it to be a snare. You knew that if you killed me, the magic would interpret it as an attack on all my children. You knew it would sever every thread." She paused, letting the horrifying implication sink into the minds of all who listened. Aldrich felt his knees go weak. Helena, despite her pain, stared at Blackthorn in dawning horror. "You don't want to purge monsters, Thaddeus Blackthorn," Morwenna declared, her voice ringing with finality. "You want to use a mother's love as a weapon to commit mass murder. You want to kill every single one of my children with the single stroke of the axe. Your vengeance is not for your daughter. It is for your own broken soul." The truth, ugly and undeniable, shattered the last vestiges of Blackthorn's authority. The guards looked at him not with loyalty, but with revulsion. Morwenna looked away from him, her work with the broken man finished. She turned her face towards the forest, towards the walls where her children watched, their fury now mixed with the terrifying, newfound vulnerability. She saw Valdis's cold understanding, Fenrir's protective panic, little Grimm's confused terror. She had carried this burden for so long. The weight of the web, the constant, gnawing knowledge that her continued existence was their cage. She had lived to keep them safe, but in doing so, she had made them prisoners of her own life. The choice was no longer a choice. It was an inevitability. She closed her eyes, drawing in a deep, shuddering breath that seemed to pull at the very fabric of the air. She raised her scarred hands, palms up. From her lips came a single, soft, sibilant word in a language older than stone, a word of unmaking. Sheena. It was not a shout, but a whisper that was felt more than heard. A wave of invisible force pulsed out from her, a silent, expanding ring of golden light visible only to those with magic in their blood. Aldrich saw it as a shimmer in the air. The monsters felt it as a sudden, breathtaking snap. The countless, invisible threads that bound Morwenna Ashweave to every creature she had ever birthed, the threads of love, of protection, of terrible sacrifice shattered. The effect on her was instantaneous and devastating. It was as if the scaffolding holding her up had been violently removed. She did not crumple, but she folded in on herself, her vibrant spirit guttering like a candle in a storm. The lively light in her eyes dimmed, her skin becoming parchment thin and gray. The act of unmaking the spell that had sustained her for decades was unmaking her in turn, hurling her towards the death she had so long held at bay. She had given them the one thing she had never been able to give them before, a life that was truly, wholly their own. They were free, and she was spent. A great, silent shudder passed through the world. It was not a sound, but a sensation, a fundamental law of existence being rewritten. In the forest, Valdris Nightblood gasped, a wholly human reflex he had not needed in centuries, as the golden tether that had connected him to his first breath, since the moment he took it, vanished. The constant, warm presence in the back of his soul, the compass that had always pointed to Morwenna, was gone. For the first time in his long, cold life, he was utterly, terrifyingly alone. And in that solitude, he understood everything. "She has unbound us," he whispered, the truth a blade of ice in his heart. Fenrir Moon's car felt it as a physical release, a cage she never knew enclosed her, suddenly falling away. The primal part of her, the wolf, rejoiced in the absolute freedom, but the part of her that was Morwenna's daughter felt only a desolate, howling emptiness. Her whine was one of pure, uncomprehending loss. On the gallows, the scene was one of suspended animation. Inquisitor Blackthorn stood frozen, his grand design annihilated not by force, but by a sacrifice he could not fathom. The guards looked on, their weapons hanging uselessly at their sides. The fight had gone out of everyone, replaced by an awe so profound it felt like dread. It was Fenrir who moved first, not with the fury of a monster, but with the gentle urgency of a child. She bounded onto the platform, her massive form suddenly delicate as she nudged aside the stunned executioner. With infinite care, she used her muzzle to gently push Morwenna, who was swaying on her feet, down onto the rough planks. Then, the great silver wolf laid down beside her, curling her body around the old woman, offering the warmth of her fur as a final blanket. A shadow fell over them, blocking the gray sky. Little Grim had finally, slowly approached. His face, a landscape of childish grief, was crumpled. He did not try to pick her up. Instead, he simply knelt, his immense body creating a shelter from the wind, his presence a bulwark against the staring world. His silent, giant tears now fell not in fear, but in homage, cratering the wood around them. The monsters did not attack. They did not roar. They advanced in a slow, solemn procession. Their rage transformed into a collective, heartbroken reverence. They formed a wide, living circle around the gallows, vampire, werewolf, giant, a united family standing guard as their matriarch lay dying. Morwenna's breath was a shallow, ragged thing. The unmaking of the spell had hollowed her out, accelerating the approach of an end she had cheated for decades. But her eyes, though dimmed, were clear. They moved from face to beloved face, from Valdris's cold, anguished grace to Fenrir's fierce devotion, from little Grim's simple sorrow to the myriad others who looked on. She did not see monsters. She saw the babies she had caught, the frightened children she had soothed, the lives she had fought for. A memory, sweet and sharp, flashed behind her eyes, a lullaby she had sung to 100 frightened newborns of 100 different kinds. Her lips, pale and dry, moved. No sound came out, but those gathered close, those connected to her by a bond deeper than magic, heard it in their souls. It was a simple melody of comfort and coming home. Her chest rose and fell one last time, a final, soft sigh that was not a surrender, but a release. It was the sound of a duty fulfilled, a love given completely. A long and weary journey finally ended. As the life left her, a single tear welled in the corner of her eye, a crystal of pure, unspeakable emotion. It traced a path through the dust and wrinkles on her cheek, a final, glistening testament. When it fell, it did not soak into the wood. It landed with a soft ping and crystallized, a perfect, tear-shaped gem that pulsed with a gentle, golden light. The last, physical remnant of a love that had bound and freed an army of monsters. From the deepest shadows, a form that had been present all along, a silent witness to every birth, and now this death stirred. The whispering shadow, the ancient death spirit, glided forward. It did not reach for Morwenna's soul. Instead, it hovered over the crystallized tear. A tendril of darkness, gentle as a caress, collected the glowing gem. In that moment, it was clear this entity did not feed on death, but on the love that was released at its threshold. Having claimed its prize, the shadow dissolved into the air, leaving behind a profound and lasting peace. Grandmother Morwenna, the midwife of monsters, was gone, and in the silence she left behind, there was no victory, only a love so vast it had silenced an army and shamed a kingdom. The silence in the courtyard was heavier than any bell toll, more profound than any battle cry. It was a silence of shame, of awe, of a world recalibrating itself around a new and terrible truth. The body of the old woman lay cradled by her children, and the power structure of Thornhaven lay broken around her. Inquisitor General Thaddeus Blackthorn did not meet anyone's eyes. The revelation of his true, genocidal intent had stripped him of all authority. The fanatical fire was gone, replaced by a hollowed-out shell of a man, his vengeance exposed as a monstrous perversion of justice. He offered no resistance as two of his own guards, their faces set with grim determination, took him by the arms. They did not lead him to a cell, but to the castle gates, where he was cast out, not as a purifier, but as a pariah. The world he sought to cleanse had no place for him. The real work of the aftermath fell to the survivors. Captain Helena Ravencroft, her shoulder bandaged and pain etched on her face, stood with Priest Aldrich at her side. The young priest's faith was not gone, but it had been reforged in the crucible of Morwenna's sacrifice. It was no longer a faith of rigid doctrine, but one of boundless compassion. There was no grand treaty signed, no triumphant declaration. The new peace was brokered in the quiet space left by Morwenna's passing. Helena, leaning on Aldrich, approached the circle of monsters. She did not speak to Valdris, the Lord, or Fenra, the Alpha. She spoke to them all. "Take her," Helena said, her voice raw but clear. "Take your mother. Give her the rest she deserves." There was no discussion. The monsters, their collective grief a tangible force, moved as one. Fenra carefully, so carefully, took Morwenna's frail form in her powerful jaws, lifting her with a tenderness that belied her ferocity. Valdris orchestrated the retreat with a silent nod. The giants formed a protective vanguard, the wolves flanked them, and the vampires melted into the shadows, a final, watchful rear guard. They did not look back at the castle, at the humans. Their world had shrunk to the beloved burden they carried. They took her deep into the heart of the Whispering Woods, to a sun-dappled glade where the air was sweet with the scent of pine and damp earth. There, they buried the midwife of monsters not as an outcast, but as a queen. They did not raise a stone cairn or carve a marker. Their memorial was the quiet of the glade and their solemn, enduring memory. In the days and weeks that followed, a fragile, unspoken truce settled over the land. The people of Thornhaven, once paralyzed by fear, now spoke of the old woman in hushed, wondering tones. The monsters did not vanish, but their presence changed. They were no longer a hidden threat, but a known, if distant, part of the world's fabric. They kept to their forests, and the hunters, their zeal cooled by the truth of Blackthorn's fanaticism, found other pursuits. The true monument to Morwenna's legacy appeared in the castle courtyard. From a crack between the blood-stained planks of the gallows, right where her crystallized tear had fallen, a sapling pushed its way towards the sun. Its bark was silvery, its leaves of vibrant, shimmering gold, pulsing with a soft, internal light that was visible even on the darkest nights. It was a thing of undeniable magic, yet no one dared to cut it down. It was a permanent, living memorial, a quiet rebellion of life against death, of love against hatred. Weeks later, under the light of a gibbous moon, Valdris Nightblood stood at the edge of the forest, looking towards the castle and its golden tree. Fenris stood beside him in her wolf form, her silence more eloquent than any words. "She gave us our lives twice over," Valdris said, his voice quiet in the vastness of the night. "Once with her breath, and once with her death. We sought to save her, but it was she who saved us. From him, from our own rage, from the cages of our own natures." Fenra let out a soft chuff of agreement, her amber eyes reflecting the distant, golden light. Valdris turned his back on the human world, his form dissolving into the shadows from which he came. His final vow, whispered to the wind, was not a promise of vengeance, but a sacred oath to the memory of his mother. "We will live the lives she gave us," he vowed. That is the only revenge worthy of her memory. And in the quiet of the woods, and in the hushed respect of the castle, and in the very soil of the world, her memory endured, not as a story of monsters, but as the eternal, golden-lit story of a mother's love. Thank you for watching. First of all, the stories we tell are either entirely fictional or inspired by real events. If you have any stories you'd like to share with us, let's chat in the comment section. If you liked our story, we'd appreciate it if you gave our video a like. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications to stay updated on our next videos. You can check out the playlist created for other stories on our channel in the card section at the top right. See you in the next video.